So, in this video, I'm going to be talking about Venus retrograde. And the particular Venus retrograde cycle we're going to be speaking about is the one happening in March to April 2025. Now, Venus retrograde, like we hear a lot about Mercury retrograde, and there can be a lot of fear about Mercury retrograde and people from the past coming up. And yes, Mercury retrograde is actually playing into this Venus retrograde, but Venus retrograde is a little bit different, and it holds a really important significance to us as a civilization. And that's because the ancients, our ancestors, watched Venus move from an evening to a morning star, which is what happens during the retrograde period, and they used it to help them understand time. So, to start off, Venus stations retrograde around once every 18 months. And she has an 8-year cycle. You might have heard that mentioned. Maybe you've been reading other things about this Venus retrograde cycle. The 8-year cycle relates to her retrograde phase happening in a specific sign. So every 8 years, she'll return to that same sign, and it will be a repeat or like a re-going over of events from that energy. And this particular 8-year phase is in, well, this particular Venus retrograde is in Pisces, and it relates to a phase that was happening 8 years ago in March, April 2017. So there is some kind of pattern that's being called to be transmuted and transformed over March and April this year. So the dates that Venus will be stationing retrograde is from the 2nd of March until the 13th of April. In SideReal astrology, which is the astronomically correct astrology, it will entirely be in Pisces. And this is beautiful because Venus is exalted in Pisces. She gets to show us the spiritual dimensions of relationships, of our relationship with the material realm. And she gets to truly be the tantric goddess that she is. She, along with Jupiter, are both considered gurus within the chart, and that kind of comes through the Vedic lineage of astrology. Jupiter tends to be more a spiritual guru and, well, all everything spiritual, but more about like high concept, esoteric philosophy, whereas Venus is a tantric goddess. She is about teaching through the material realm. And when she's in Pisces, it's like we get to experience the material dissolving into the spiritual, the material dissolving into the metaphysical, so that we can ultimately understand that every relationship we have, that every, be that with things or with people, is taking us back to the divinity within. It is all there to help us remember who we are. Now, Venus was really important to the ancients and to our ancestors. In fact, the oldest written myth is not Gilgamesh, it's the descent of Inanna. And the descent of Inanna was a Sumerian myth, and it was actually a myth about Venus. Venus is Inanna, and Inanna is the goddess of heaven, and she has to conquer the underworld, or she has to come to meet her otherworldly sister, which is what happens during a Venus retrograde cycle. We go into the underworld in order to become the true goddess of heaven and earth. And so Venus is, and this Venus retrograde period is all about venturing into the underworld. And the descent of Inanna is essentially, Inanna has to go to the underworld because Ereshkigal, her otherworldly sister who rules the underworld, her husband's died. And so she's going down to pay her respects. And so as she steps down into the underworld, there are 7 gates that she passes, and that aligns with the 7 chakras, but it's actually astronomically about the 7 lunar phases that happen as Venus moves once again from an evening to a morning star. So she reaches the bottom, um, and as she reaches the bottom of the underworld and meets her sister, that's when we have the Venus star point, which will happen during this retrograde period. it's when Venus and the sun meet, and it seems that Venus has disappeared from the sky when she meets the sun. And this is the 3 days we don't see her, the 3 days in which she is killed by her sister and hung up. And then from that, she is then brought back to life and sent back up into the world. And this is what happens when she moves from her conjunction with the sun back up and she becomes a morning star, still in her retrograde phase. And so this is a myth that has informed it's our earliest mythology. And so it says to us, actually, this Venus retrograde cycle, the cosmology of it affects our own cosmic body. It is a period of metamorphosis, it's a period of transformation, it's a period of facing the places within us where we haven't fully loved, where we've had some kind of distorted relationship with ourselves, which is represented through a rescue girl, through the otherworldly sister that rules the underworld. We all have that in us. We all have the queen of the underworld or the king of the underworld that lives within us that we repress. And it is that underworld energy that has to slay us in order for us to be reborn in a way where we have the skills to respect all. We have the ability to love in a way that we didn't know we could. And so there are many astrologers that talk about the fact that Venus was really important to the Atlanteans, which is why she then shows up as a really big figure with the Mayans as well as the Egyptians, who were using her still to help work out their timekeeping. And so those two, the Mayans and the Egyptians, were believed to be quite close to the Atlantean civilization. In the Vedas, Venus is a tantric goddess and a guru, like I just said. She's the earthly Jupiter, the earthly guru, which really is Shakti. That's what the Divine Mother is all about. And she helps us step into realization of who we really are by going through the world. This isn't about transcending the world, it's about that going in and in and in, going down into the very core of the earth and dealing with the distorted relationship we might have around money, around relationships, around self worth, around our value as well as our values. She deals with all aspects of love. Internally is what she's really about, but often the way in which we understand love is in a limited way. That's the distortion, the limitation of love in an external setting. And through her process of retrograde, we get to clean some of that up. So in this upcoming period, which will happen in March and April, we're being called to reflect upon a cycle that started 8 years ago in March, April 2017, when Venus last had her star point in Pisces. So, if you can think back that far, you might find after listening to this, you kind of like sit with, okay, scroll through your calendar, what was happening in 2017, um, or even just like sit with that energy, like, what do I think was going on for me, and let the wisdom within you tell you. But if there was energy going on around love and relationships, around worthiness, particularly because she's in Pisces for this period, for this conclusion of this cycle of energy, we're dealing with ancestral patterns and vasanas, karmic seeds that live within our ancestry up to 7 generations back, that have been showing up in our relationships, that have been showing up in how we value ourselves or undervalue ourselves, how we consider money and possessions, or we see them as limiters to our being. And it's time to release those. It's time to work through those by facing the shadow aspect of it and realizing there is nothing to fear. It's fear which drives the limitation. And so if you can think back to 2017, you might notice there was stuff showing up for you then. For me, I really feel like this is a cycle coming up all about trust. It's the ability to really trust the divine, but it's also the divine is not something external, the divine is within you. It's that ability to really trust the guidance, the intuition, the love that lives within, that is big, it's continuous, it is not limited by the material world. What's really important with this Venus retrograde is she's going to be aligned with Mercury retrograde. So from the 15th of March until the 7th of April, it can feel pretty intense. Mercury will station retrograde on the 7th of April, so that's why that period is in play. And it means that because the two will be sitting together, it means that we're going back in time. We're really being shot back into old loves, old relationships, old and maybe commitments or soul contracts that didn't work out. Maybe it's where there was an exchange of money. It could have been an exchange of love. And we're working through old patterns. We're taking responsibility for ourselves, knowing that that's all we can ever do. It's not our job to, like, it's not a time to necessarily call up that person and be like, hey, you did this. No, 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 no. It's only ever about us. And when we change the world around us, and we change the relationship dynamics that we're working through that are part of our karma. So there is the potential for immense healing at this time, and for you to really see what you haven't been aware of, what you've been hiding. The energy will peak on the 23rd of March. That's when we have the Venus star point. That's when Venus and the Sun will meet. That's when Venus is right down in the underworld, visiting her otherworldly sister, which is what lives within you. And she's going to be aligned with the goddess asteroid Ariadne. And Ariadne is the mistress of the labyrinth. And her lesson is really there is no way out but through. And that's really what this Venus retrograde is about. And what's so important about this point where the Sun, Ariadne, and Venus retrograde meet is it's also where Neptune and Saturn will start to meet later this year. They won't perfectly meet this year, that will happen next year. That all said, this is the first year I feel really called to work with Venus retrograde. I normally just include it as a part of one of the ritual readings I do, and I will send out a reading as a part of this. But this is the time to embody the mythology of Inanna, to access the wisdom of our ancestors and of those who venerated and worshipped Venus, and access the wisdom that lives within you. So, I'm going to be running a 7-week embodied astrology journey every Sunday or Saturday evening. If you're in the States, it's Sunday morning, East Coast Australia. We will meet for an hour and a half, and we will work with the particular phase that Venus is at. So, her descent down into the underworld, her meeting with her otherworldly sister, her rising up and ascending as a morning star. We will be working with that and accessing the knowledge you already have within you through sacred practice and meditation. And what I found when I've been running these groups is the what we know is so incredible when we give ourselves the space to know it. Our ability to heal ourselves is profound when we have the space to heal it. And this is being done in community in a really small group of 13 people. There's currently 6 places available if you want to join the journey. And if you can't make the live meditation, you'll be sent the replay as a follow up, but know energetically you'll be in circle with us. It's the opportunity to join what is happening cosmically with what is happening within you, to access that mythology, to have a deeper relationship with the Divine Mother as Venus, as this tantric goddess. Particularly if you know maybe you're feeling blocks in like soul contracts and relationships, or blocks around money and your values and how you value yourself, or you're wanting to go into deeper spiritual connection. This is a container to explore that and to access the wisdom within you through the space we create for each other. So I'll put details below, but otherwise, I'm wishing you a wonderful Venus retrograde, and may it be a period of rebirth. May you have the opportunity to really have the courage to see the karma that comes up, the wisdom to work with that, and the lightness to be able to transmute that into more love.